Hey there, it's Nazreen from the Golden Nuggets podcast. If you guys are a business owner, consultant, coaches, experts, or self-employed professionals looking to grow your reach, I would like to introduce to you the Podium. It is our flagship podcast where we feature professionals just like you to share your story, to promote your business, and connect with a broader audience in the podcast space. So far, we have successfully completed 10 episodes featuring incredible guests, and the feedback has been awesome. And for a limited time offer, previously we charged for $250. We raised it slightly higher. Right now it's at $300 per episode. It is a 70% discount from our original price. This includes not only being featured in the podcast, but also gaining content to promote your business and credibility that comes with it. If you've been considering to be part of a podcast, now is your chance. Don't miss out this opportunity to amplify your message, reach to new audience, and stand out within your industry. I look forward to see you in the Podium, and let's share your story. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Golden Nuggets podcast. My name is Nazreen. I have Hanafi beside me.
Hi,
and
everybody.
our main host, Amir.
Yo.
And today...
He just demoted you, bro.
sorry, bro, sorry. So today we have a special guest, a podcast strategist. Just now as we discussed in our offline talks, she did a lot of things in the past, and she took the risk to jump into something new. Something that she always been wanting to do. So based on her LinkedIn profile, you know, she's actually look at how much I need to scroll.
Yeah, she's a podcast strategist.
That's one.
Yeah.
She's a broadcast journalist as well, and a content creator.
Wow.
And she's a co-host. She used to be a producer at Money FM.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
So Hanafi, who do we have today?
Today we have Rhianne Lovell-Boland.
Welcome.
Did I butcher your name?
No, I mean, actually you did really well considering most people like completely butcher it, but it's Rhianne Lovell-Boland. But yeah, you did really well. Thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm so glad to be here.
All right, so Rhianne, for our listeners who don't know you, can you share a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So hi, I'm Rhianne, and I've been living in Singapore this will be my 8th year now.
Okay.
And yeah, as you said, I was previously at Money FM. That's one of the reasons why I moved to Singapore. And before that, I was in Malaysia, and I was working at Bloomberg TV there. So I not only worked in radio, I've worked in TV, and then I started my career in London at the BBC actually. So always been very passionate about media, radio, and I'm mixed race. So grew up in the UK. My mum is Indian Malaysian, and I'm British and Irish. So I have a little bit of like lived in a few different places, and lived in Malaysia and Vietnam and kind of all around. So yeah, and I'm so glad to be here today.
Okay.
Sounds very Roja.
A mix of a lot of things.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. You grew up in London, right? I think you mentioned.
Very specifically, it's a very small town called Saffron Walden. Shout out to anyone who knows that place. But it's just like 20 minutes from Cambridge, 1 hour from London. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how was it like growing up over there?
Actually,
like as compared to what you see here in Singapore?
Yeah. I mean, for me, like I can't say that I had a very traditional upbringing, like in the sense of like I wasn't very English, and I'm also back then I wasn't very in touch with my Asian roots. So sometimes I would be like, oh god, my hair is quite curly. Back then it was more frizzy than curly, but and I would be like, oh, I just want to look like everyone else, I just want to fit in, and now I'm like, I look back at that time because my mom used to cook like Malaysian food, and I'd be like, why can't she just cook like English food? Now I'm like, why would I want that? Like the food is so much better, nasi lemak is like so my favorite food ever. Amira, I said when I first met, I was like, Singapore nasi lemak needs to be better. Like,
really?
Yeah, the Malaysian one is like that much better.
I agree. We didn't work.
But I was always someone who was quite confident, I think. Maybe not confident. I would say an extrovert. I was always very extroverted, and if there was any like opportunity to be on stage or like perform, I'd always be like, yes, please, I want to come, like I want to be volunteer.
You're a chaser.
Yeah.
a limelight chaser.
I think so, a little bit, and that was something that was like always, like it wasn't a very learned thing. It was just something that I like enjoyed, and like I just wanted to be like a performer, I guess. And one of the things I think, even though I didn't really fit in school. Like I think I stood out quite a lot. And I think that isolated me because of that difference. So one thing that like really gave me solace was like listening to the radio.
Okay.
And yeah, I think also, and still to this day, I'm not very good in the mornings. Like my parents would always be like, Rhianne, you're going to be late for school, and try to like wake me up. And I actually have a story where one time my dad threatened me in the winter time with like pouring some water over me to get out of the bed. Luckily it didn't happen. But in the end they were like, okay, you know what? We're going to buy you like a radio alarm clock.
Okay.
And so for me, that was like, it was something that really like connected with me, the presenters, and like it was such a intimate relationship of like I thought I knew these people, like I was with them every day, you know, they were with me on my journey to school. And so from that, when I realized like, oh my gosh, you can do this as a job, like you can get paid to talk to people and like make them feel comfortable and all of those things, that was like from a really young age, I thought this is what I want to do. Like, that was it. Yeah, for me.
You mentioned that you kind of like stand out amongst your peers, right? Does that affect you negatively? Like, do you get bullied and all?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think especially in the small town that I grew up in, like it wasn't diverse like London. So for me, I did get like quite isolated, and people like didn't really like. I guess in the UK, there's like a big Pakistani community, so people thought I was from there and would say like racial slurs like that. And actually at the time I didn't even know what that meant. I was like, and then another term is called half caste, which is something I later reclaimed because in my university when I was studying media and radio, I actually created a radio documentary called Hello, I'm Half Caste. And that ended up winning lots of awards.
Ooh, wow.
Awesome.
It got like national attention. It was played on the BBC and things like that. So that was like a real changing point for me to reclaim that identity of having been bullied as a mixed race person. And yeah, it was like really, I guess for someone who wanted to fit in, it was something like, oh, you're recognized for that, and having won 2 awards. So I was really like, wow, okay, this is something that I can use to my benefit and like to be authentic to myself and use to just be me, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, saying that you reclaim the term half caste, I think that is quite powerful.
Yeah.
Like, first of all, we go back to your like when you were in school, right?
Yeah, sure.
At that point of time when you were being bullied, does it affect your grades in any way, and does it affect like the trajectory of your future?
I think
in any way.
I think like again going back to being like innately wanting to put myself. I think going back to innately wanting to put myself out there, that really dimmed my confidence a lot. And I think I lost a lot of self-belief in, you know, when people tell you you're this, you're that, or you're too loud, or you're too brown, or whatever. Like, I don't know, it does knock your confidence. And I think it's something that I ended up keeping and holding on to, like, I need to be quiet, or I need to like maybe not put myself out there so much, or maybe I should just like try and like maybe not be so vocal and like so that people don't like pick on me or whatever. So it definitely had a knock-on effect in terms of that. And it's something actually I'm still working on. Like I feel like, especially starting, you know, my own business, I think it's something that crept up again, like, how do I put myself out there with like, you know, with all those things that I guess we sadly from childhood sometimes hold on to. So what you are sharing is right now while you are starting your own business, it's still affecting you in some ways. Yeah, definitely. Like I think,
like even in Singapore.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think even though I think I've you know, I am an extroverted person, but sometimes like I'm always like, I sometimes overthink things. I try to like maybe have that lack of self-belief. And it's something I think when you're starting a business, and me personally, when I mean, I guess I quit my job and I didn't really have a backup plan. I didn't really know what I'm doing in business. I know how I have the skills in media, but do I know how to do a business? No. So then the self-doubt creeps in again, and you're like, you don't know what you're doing. You don't have the skills. But then later, like now I'm already 1 year into my business. I'm like, those things can be learned, you know. So it's actually like really focusing on your mindset of like trying not to let the negativity really like infiltrate and just be like, well, yeah, I don't know it now, but it's not something that I can't learn or try. And if it doesn't go well, fail knowing that you were moving forward to your goal, you know. So it's like it's a mindset thing that you really have to work on. So yeah, it's been something that I've struggled with sometimes, but I think the only way to figure it out is to try, and you get there. If you don't, then you're like, okay, maybe it's not for me, but try something else.
I mean, like recently I heard this phrase. It says fail quicker, learn faster. Yeah, so the more you fail, the quicker you fail, the more you will learn, and you are always moving in the right direction.
I think it's easier said than done though, because even
That's true.
for me itself, like I right now at this point in my entrepreneurial journey, I guess I'm like trying to put myself out there a bit more in terms of social media. And even though like I am an extrovert, I find it very difficult.
How's that working out for you?
I mean, I'm okay with like this sort of studio setup, and I'm kind of okay talking to one-on-one in a camera, like to a camera. But like if I'm out in the wild, like like filming myself or talking, I get very like shy, and I'm like, oh no, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of funny, like how I don't really know why. But I guess like you see so many people on social media that's so polished, knowing what they're doing. So for me, I'm like, okay, I'll just. And for the longest time, I really like avoided trying to do it as much as possible, maybe doing like posts or carousels and like not putting my face on, and you know. But now I'm like, actually, you know what? It's if I don't try and if I don't figure it out, then it's just gonna delay the process longer and longer. So now I'm like, okay, you know what? I've just gotta bite the bullet and actually try. And if it doesn't work out, never mind, just delete and try again.
So here's the thing that I've been doing actually, just to share with you a bit. So for the past 2 weeks, I've been posting daily, consistently, reels every single day.
Oh wow!
It's for me to prove a point. And this week I haven't posted a single reel. So for the whole 2 weeks, right, I've been consistently getting leads, inquiries, and so on and so forth. People were connecting and messaging me. And this week, day number 3 of no posting.
Zilch.
0.
Really?
Yeah, and I was just telling both of them, it's like totally nobody's like thinking about me. We are not at the top of the mind. So like you said, it's just delaying the process.
It's true. And actually, I haven't been posting daily, but I've been creating reels and maybe doing posts and carousels and things. And I have noticed like, more followers, people who I don't know who are like, hey, what do you do? You know, like, what are your services? And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Let's chat. You know, I want to talk more. So it is true, actually. Like, the more you put yourself out there, the more you're actually able to sort of like connect with your ideal audience and client. So,
share a bit more about how you reclaim the term half-caste.
Okay, so I guess, you know, people can't really tell, like, looking at me like, where I'm from. And even still in Singapore, sometimes I get it. We're like, where are you from? It's only maybe when they hear the accent, because my accent's quite distinctly like English, that they're like, oh, you're English, okay. And I guess being like from the small town, as I mentioned, like I just felt like this is who I guess maybe just to share a bit, like growing up, I really wanted to just like fit in and things like that. And I never really connected with, you know, my Asian side. It's only when I moved to Vietnam when I was 16, and it was through my my family's job and things like that. So that's when I like, wow, Asia's so cool. Like it's such a fun place. It's vibrant. It's like the food is awesome. Like the people are so friendly. So that's when I really like tried to like, okay, now who am I as an Asian? But then I'm not just purely Asian. I'm also, you know, half British and Irish as well. So then I was like, you know what, I want to do something, and I want to create a documentary piece that's truly represents me and what I'm about. So there was this poem which I studied in my like high school years, which is called Half Caste. And it's a poem by John Agard. And it's a really interesting poem because it basically says, you know, it kind of, highlights the problem of like just calling someone a half caste, because are you half of something or are you a whole of something? So it's like, so you mix a black key and a white key on a piano, is it a half caste symphony? Or if when Picasso mixed red and green, is it a half caste canvas? It like or if like the sky is rainy and sunny, is it like a half caste weather? You know, like no, it's not, it's a whole thing, right? So he kind of like turned the creativity of the word half caste and made it like very obvious that no, it's not half of anything, it's a whole of something. So I then decided, right, okay, how am I going to be creative with this? So I mixed different people who have mixed heritage, read the poem, and then I also mixed it with people talking about the term half caste and what it means to them and how they've been affected by it, along with an interview from someone who was a professor on words. And so he actually described, where does the term come from? Will we continue using it? What is it, a derogatory term? So it's all this mix, like you said, rojak, you know, like of everything. And so I created it like a blend to kind of create this whole documentary piece, and I'm so proud of it because it won a national student radio award, and so then it was played on the BBC radio, and also won another very prestigious prize in the UK called the Charles Parker Prize. So I was like so proud of that, and I think from that validation in a way, was like, okay, no, I'm proud of this. This is something that, you know, I can be proud of. It's like this mixed heritage.
Where can people look up for this documentary?
Actually, if you search, I have it on SoundCloud. So if you type "Hello, I'm half caste," it'll probably be the only one, and it's Rhianne Lovell-Boland on my SoundCloud. It's there.
When was this?
It was actually a very long time ago.
When you were a student?
When I was a student. So it was about 2012. Yeah, it was my final year. Like project. So I'm guessing I'm giving away my age now a little bit.
When was the pivotal point where you accepted that term? Was it after you received the award, during that whole process, or before?
I think I've always been, I think to be honest with you, the real time when the term itself was probably when I was making the documentary piece, but I think I was very more so, what the pivotal turning point for me to like claim my mixed race identity was actually moving to Asia and seeing and then like being in the Asian culture, really seeing it, because
and experiencing
experiencing it from like firsthand, I think, and then also being more, because when we were in Vietnam, I was going over to Malaysia more, seeing family and like actually just like learning more about my culture, and the interesting thing is when you're really involved in it and you really see it, you're like, oh, that's why I'm like that. Like I would always be like, as a half Malaysian, I was always like waking up in the morning, having breakfast, and then the next thing was like, okay, so what's for dinner? Like the food was always like a real pivotal thing, like really like integral thing for me. And like I noticed like British people were never like
they don't really care as much, right?
And then for me, I was always like, I'm even like obviously now like, oh, I take my shoes off before going in the house, and like I don't know, I was
culture.
A lot of culture, like for me, was at home was very Asian, because even though my dad is British and Irish, like he grew up in Malaysia as well. So he has a more of a Asian mindset for me. So it's only kind of like later on where I was like, oh, so this is what like typical English people are like. You know? Like, it was like a bit of a culture shock, I guess, for me. So I think when I realized like, okay, I have, you know, I guess it was just like, that was the moment for me. But it was nice to have the recognition, and like people realize like, oh, it maybe, you know, it's not the correct term for people to use, or some people might find it offensive. Like I actually interviewed John Agard, the one who wrote the poem, and I said, would you be offended if someone has called you half caste? And he said, actually, if someone called me a half caste gentleman and they weren't familiar with the baggage of the term, he was like, the intent is not to offend, right? You can tell if someone is like, oh, you know, aggressively calling you that it's hate, exactly. Whereas he was like, I wouldn't want to, you know, create that barrier and a wall of being like, excuse me, you know, what are you doing? When the intention wasn't to be malicious. It was actually, he would just say, you know, explain, it's some people wouldn't want to be called that. So maybe to to just be aware of it, but not to sort of create that, again, an argument or a dispute when the intention is not malicious. So I think it's an important point actually to make. Like, to some people don't realize. Even I had a situation last week where someone, I was in the shop and then they were pointing out like. It was just a simple interaction, but they were showing me like, oh, these are the potatoes that you people like, right? You people. And I was like, what does that mean by you people? You mean because
people.
Yeah. And I was like, so actually I just laughed and I was like, oh, I guess British people would use that. Yeah. But I don't take it in offense because I was like, I know he's
Is there really a different kind of potato?
I don't really know also what he meant as well. So that's why I was a bit confused. But I was like, oh, you people. Okay, that's the first time I've been like labeled in that way where I was like, okay. But yeah, it is always something that comes up like, where are you from? Where are you from? Where are you from? And sometimes it gets a little bit draining where you're like, okay, well, all these 3 places and I've lived here, there, and everywhere. But in the end, I'm like, actually, I guess that's what makes me me. So yeah.
I think there's a very important learning lesson here, especially to the listeners who are on the fence of whether I want to be an entrepreneur or not, and that kind of stuff, which is to accept your identity and use it to build your personal brand.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like a foundation. It's like the basic, you need to accept yourself.
Yeah.
Before people can accept you.
Yeah.
Right? So
definitely.
Share with us a bit more about your time during the BBC.
Yeah.
Like how it was in the media scene.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, okay. Well, I guess my goal from a really young age was to be a radio presenter.
Yeah.
And I think after winning the awards, I was a little bit like, doors are going to open for me. I'm going to be like...
Was that really the case?
No. Not at all. Like,
were you like expecting rainbows and butterflies after that? And
I think because... I think in a way like I'd had so much I wouldn't say like a difficult childhood. Like I just think it was always hard for me. Like nothing ever came easy. And I always felt like I was always, trying to be recognized or trying, and it's only when it finally happened I was like, great, this is gonna like start my radio career. I'm gonna be like, and it just didn't happen that way. So I managed to get into the BBC, and actually the first job I ever had there was answering the phones, but it was for a breakfast radio station. It was breakfast radio show on the BBC, and that was like my main motivation of getting into radio in the first place. When listening to the breakfast show, it was like the whole thing that like made me feel so connected. So even though I was just answering the phones, I was like, it's okay, it's a step in, I'm in the building, like I'm here, people could see me, I'm making tea for people, like if I make really good tea, maybe I'll like move up. But it does happen that way. You kind of make friends and you're like, oh, I'm available if you need anything for this. But it is quite slow. I would say that the organization has like people who've been there for like
ages.
And so sometimes it's a little hard to sort of, I think you really have to be there for like 10 years plus to really progress. Like I did manage to get a broadcast assistant, so it's sort of like a producer, but like maybe one less like assistant producer, I guess. So I managed to get there, and I also was working as freelancer in different radio stations in London. So that was really cool because I was working for a channel called LBC, which was a national radio station called Leading Britain's Conversation. They had a lot of politicians on there. So I met people like Boris Johnson. At the time, David Cameron was the Prime Minister. So he was people who we were interviewing like on the... And again, it was for breakfast radio stations. So I really enjoyed that. But I got to a point to maybe 2-3 years in after like leaving university, I was like, I really want to move to Asia. I want to leave, and I want to... That was, again, something that I was quite certain about. Like, I don't want to be in London anymore. I want to come to Asia. So I was very lucky that my mum was living in Malaysia, and she kind of put me in touch with a headhunter. And he was like, actually, there is a job. There's Bloomberg TV is opening in Malaysia. And I was like, okay. I don't know much about business or finance, and I've not really worked in TV, but I think, journalism skills are transferable, so you know, let's give it a go. And that was like a real difference for me. Like, it was actually very hard the first few months, like not being in Malaysia per se, but like I think the cultural differences in work, like knowing that like, oh, you can't leave until your boss has left, like whereas in the UK it's like, oh, the show is done, okay, let's go to the pub, you know. It's like, it's a little bit different. And then also like understanding politics. A little bit about the politics, but it was more about like business and finance and understanding markets, which is something that like as an early 20-year-old I was like not really interested in. So for me it was like a bit of a learning curve. Like I also wanted, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I really wanted to like be good and like prove myself, you know. So I'm not too proud to admit there was a few tears along the way, like why can't I just get my head around it? But I think once I like fully like dove straight into that world and like was living it and realizing like, oh, one little like event here can like affect markets, can affect markets here, and like the drama of it, and find something that interests me with it. I was like, oh wow, like okay, oh, and this person, like it became very interesting to me, because I ended up that curiosity, that innate sort of like reason of why I wanted to get into journalism and understand different worlds, like that for me then was like, oh okay, that's it became fascinating. And also it was a time when the 1MDB scandal was happening in Malaysia. So for me it was like, oh wow, this is like really interesting as a journalist, like trying to get this out, trying not to be censored, like trying to, you know, how do we do this? Like, what is fact? What is just like maybe hearsay? So all of those things were very interesting for me, like as like working in TV for journalism then. So, and very sadly, again, mostly because of like how the ringgit tanked during that time, the company closed down within 2 years. So so but then I ended up getting a job again back in radio at a station called BFM, which is an independent radio station there. And I actually sort of achieved my goal of becoming a radio presenter there. So it was really fun. I really liked it there. But my husband got a job in Singapore, and that's what brought us here. And so,
What was the full term of BFM?
The business station, so Business FM, 89.9. It's a brilliant station. If anyone's in Malaysia listening, like shout out to you guys. It was one of my favorite jobs, I would have to say. And because of that job at BFM, Money FM in Singapore were actually learning from BFM. They came over to like learn how are they doing it, what is the setup, who are like they interviewing, and from that I was like, oh, my husband's moving to Singapore, he's got a job here, and my boss who was at BFM, he gave me a very good recommendation, and that's how I got my job at Money FM.
Before we end the first part, right, we just want to understand how the hierarchy is like in radio itself. Like who is right at the top? Is it the producer? Is it the broadcaster itself? And then who is below that? You know?
So I guess you have like your sort of like your head of radio, and then you'd have like a director who's like in charge of the station, and then you have like all the different radio programs, and those people are teams. But then I would say the presenter has a lot of like sway, but the producer, someone like me, is the one that's like, I think we should do this topic, and they're the ones that like does the research, the guest booking, the editing, the real like nitty gritty stuff. So
this is done by the producer?
The producer, So the presenters usually are given the script, and they sort of like, they can do their own research as well. But usually all the work is like mostly from the producer, and then the presenters are the voice and the actual sort of like, the ones who's the person whose show it is and things like that. But it's a team effort. Like,
is it the same in Singapore? Because like from what I observe, some of the presenters are also the producers.
Yeah, that's true. I think I'm talking, I guess, from like I was working on a morning show here, and that was more of a team effort. But yeah, you're right. I think there are some people who do maybe more on like music radio. Music, that one they would be the producer and the presenter. But for more talk and like things like, I always say, well, I don't say it, this someone said, but like talk radio is a hungry beast, and you always have to feed it. So it takes a lot of effort. Like I'm sure you guys know as podcasters, like having to find people to and interview, the research it takes, like all of those things, coming up with questions. It's a lot of like teamwork and hard work to get into to make it seem seamless.
I mean, you mentioned about the music radio. It's more towards like the dual role, right? Like how hard is it as a producer for the business and also finance kind of station?
I think
like you mentioned when you were still in the UK, they need to like for example invite David Cameron, and then they need to figure out what exactly to ask and everything, right? So all this is done by the producer.
So actually, it's the producers, but I think it would be the people who are more in the back end, or like the ones that are coming up with questions, like booking them, all of those things. The presenters are the ones who are sort of like reading and talking and having that conversation, and more front of mic, front of camera. So I guess for me, it was having had a bit more of experience in, markets, business, and all those things. Like it's still one of those, I guess, for me, I can't talk about anyone else, but like I still felt like a little uncomfortable in that world because it didn't come from that world. It was like, and I think also being a woman, sometimes business and finance seems a little like, oh, there's so much jargon and like, I don't know, it just seems like very difficult. So for me, my goal when I was like working there was, how do I break this down for a layman to understand? Because if I don't understand and I want to learn, it's not that I don't want to, but I need to understand it. So for me, I would be like, so explain that. What does that word mean? Or what does that, you just said, this acronym, what does that mean? Because if I'm not asking those questions, then the other, like a lay person's not going to, they're going to switch off, right? They're not going to know what it means or how, and they're just, again, it's going to keep that cycle of like feeling like, oh, it's not for you. Like maybe you're too stupid to like understand.
So my question is, why don't the finance and business radio do the same thing as music? Because I think it's much more important for the finance and business side, right? To be holding the dual role, because it's much more important for them to understand all these terms as compared to like perhaps in the normal music radio where the research about a celebrity is so much more easier than
I mean, I'm not saying that people just like show up and talk. Like, of course, they're going to be doing,
So even the presenters have to do their own homework.
Like we would always make sure that like everything is like in place the day before. They can read through. They do their own research as well if they want to. I think it's not just that, but it would be very difficult for like, I guess if you're doing maybe 4 or 5 interviews in one show, you need to have a team to sort of like prepare all of that as well. So whereas with music radio, you're talking maybe it's a lot less time for talk. Actually, you're talking for maybe 1 minute, then playing a song. So in that sense that like, okay, let's talk about, the Grammys or maybe the halftime show. Okay, and then you're able to like, oh, did you see this? And then, oh, it was really cool. Like they did this, and have your own opinions. Whereas with business, and it's more facts and figures and so you have to be like very much more on your game. So that's why with radio, music radio, you can be more personality and all of this. With business radio, it's like, okay, it's not about me, it's about what people can learn. We're here to educate as well, right? It's a different medium in that sense, I guess.
Can I have one last question before we end the episode?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Like when you talk about the 2 different radios, right? The music one and the business one. Do they have the same energy level? Do they like hype up like?
For sure, in the morning you've got to, right? No one like if you want to just be having like dry radio and like and this happened in the market. It's like no one. You got to have that energy. You got to be excited.
So even when market is tanking, you can.
I mean,
the market is tanking, guys.
I mean, in that sense, you've got to be like, okay, is this a cause for concern? You've got to sort of like really reassure your listeners, like, okay, if you have assets in this, what can you do? It's more reassurance in those times, but you still want to be like an ear for people to like listen to. It goes back to, again, like me kind of like having that person like reassuring me in the morning when I was a child. You want that person to like hold your hand, like, oh, if the markets are crashing, like, oh, what do I do? Tell me what to do, or what are my options, or things like that.
And then your opinions and suggestions.
Exactly. And then on the other hand, when things are going well, like, okay, great. So what are the opportunities? What are we going to look at? Okay. What are maybe alternatives? Like, is this something we should be, all of those things. There's so much content. I can't go into everything, but like, you do have to have that personality, because if you don't, then you're not going to connect with your audience, and you're not going to resonate, and they might just turn off if they don't really like you. Actually, you do have to have that like element of personality.
A likable personality.
The likability. For sure. Yeah.
All right. So with that, we shall end this episode.
Yep.
Yeah. And if you guys want to go out of your way to learn more jargons, I hope there's not a lot of jargons in this episode.
We keep it layman.
Yes.
We keep it simple.
But if you want to, go learn more, like, how she did with all the jargons and so on, stay tuned for part 2.
Yes.
Bye-bye.